video game created for the Game Boy Advance was released and is considered one of the more unique installations to the YuGiOh video game library. Everything worked fine for several years, but something as large as YuGiOh couldn't stay smooth forever. In 2008, Konami, the legal owners of YuGiOh, filed a complaint with Upper Deck, the distributors of the card game, beginning what was known at the time as the Dark Age of YuGiOh.
It's time to duel!
Konami accused Upper Deck of selling repackaged YuGiOh booster packs containing counterfeit cards. Konami subpoenaed records from Upper Deck, but Upper Deck refused to comply. Afterward, Upper Deck filed a lawsuit alleging Konami had breached their contractual agreement, saying that Konami was committing fraud and slander. Konami had decided to sever their ties with Upper Deck and wanted to distribute the cards themselves. However, a Dutch court decided to favor with Upper Deck, which halted Konami from severing their contract with them. Back-and-forth allegations would go on for another year, until the Amsterdam High Court of Appeals sided with Upper Deck, but upheld Konami's termination with Upper Deck. Now, Konami has complete control over the YuGiOh card game worldwide. On the YuGiOh official website, an article was released stating, "Discovery in the lawsuit revealed that Upper Deck had counterfeited YuGiOh TCG cards, and that it took extensive steps to cover up that activity." The cover-up included a meeting in the office of Upper Deck's chairman, in which he, and at least one other Upper Deck employee, compared samples of authentic YuGiOh TCG cards against fakes made by Upper Deck, and shredded the samples in the chairman's office, as well as an email from an employee of Upper Deck to other employees asking to provide her information how to obtain YuGiOh TCG security foils in, quote, secrecy. This was considered the dark ages of YuGiOh, since players weren't certain what would happen to the game, and several players quit the game in fear of what was to come. But that's not all that happened when it comes to YuGiOh. The anime would face troubles as well. The anime had made an estimated $152 million for 4Kids Entertainment, but it should be common knowledge now that 4Kids engaged in shady business practices. The Japanese companies behind animating and broadcasting the YuGiOh anime filed a lawsuit claiming that 4Kids owed them millions of dollars and demanded to audit 4Kids' financial books to see if 4Kids was properly paying them the agreed upon amount. 4Kids was caught licensing several products based around Japanese animated series, mostly home videos, and hiding the money from the original creators. There was attempts to work out the situation outside of court, and 4Kids sent $1 million as a good faith payment. But when Japanese representatives flew to America for a final meeting, 4Kids refused to meet with them. Since then, TV Tokyo Corporation canceled their agreements with 4Kids and filed a lawsuit seeking $4 million in damages and breach of contract.
I really didn't think about it all that much. If you've played this game as long as I have, you know that Konami actually has disputes with its partners a lot of times. They had an entire thing with Upper Deck where Upper Deck used to run the TCG side of the game, and then right before 5Ds, they ended up getting sued by Konami. There was this whole thing with counterfeiting cards, and those two kind of had a messy breakup. So when I see stories pop up like this, I really don't give it too much thought because Konami is always having conflicts with the people they work with.
4Kids would eventually have such serious financial and legal troubles that they closed their studio, and these issues left people wondering what would happen to the airing of the YuGiOh television show. 4Kids was responsible for questionable choices when censoring the anime and manga. There was a strong concept that Japanese culture should stay out of American culture during the early 2000s, and because of that, there were unnecessary changes to all of the shows and manga that 4Kids localized, often adding details that weren't part of the original work, which is currently criticized and heavily opposed by modern fans. Kazuki Takahashi eventually became very opposed to censorship of his work, not only with the manga, but mostly with his illustrations. A lot of artwork for Yu-Gi-Oh cards were censored, often hiding breasts, blood, and other, possibly gruesome scenes. Takahashi made clear that he had no longer wanted his work to be censored. However, this only means it is more difficult for fans in the West to attain cards with his work, since censorship of the artwork is still a common practice, and Konami finds it easier to comply with Takahashi by simply not releasing his work in America.
I definitely believe that he is incredibly talented and just a brilliant mind. This is shown not just with the creation of the Yu-Gi-Oh franchise and Yu-Gi-Oh DM the anime, but he also made Yu-Gi-Oh 5Ds and Yu-Gi-Oh GX, two amazing spin-off series, and he's still very active. He just made another manga series that is coming out, or I believe just premiered. So, you know, the guy is incredibly talented, but I don't think about Takahashi all that much.
The television series would soon stray away from 4Kids and jump from station to station as they pushed forward with giving their American audience what they wanted. After the original series with Yugi and his friends, Yu-Gi-Oh GX released on the CW, following Jaden Yuki, a direct sequel to the original series and aired from 2004 to 2008. In between Yu-Gi-Oh GX was Yu-Gi-Oh Capsule Monsters, a short 12-episode series that went back to the original cast of characters for a small adventure. This series wasn't initially released in Japan, turning heads for several fans in the East. Afterward, Yu-Gi-Oh 5Ds aired on Cartoon Network and attempted to give the game a breath of fresh air by adding turbo duels, where the characters would play the game while riding motorcycles for high-speed battles, and introduced synchro monsters into the card game, where players would have to summon these monsters by using a tuner monster, and combining other monsters whose levels added up to the level of the synchro monster.
I'm one of the very few individuals that still plays this game that was around when Synchro Monsters were first released, and the thing is, this was at a time where Dark Arm Return was one of the strongest decks, pretty much the strongest deck of the format, and what happened was Synchro Monsters being released basically laid the foundation for one of the strongest decks in this game's history to come into existence, and that is Teledad. And for those of you who don't know, Teledad is pretty much revered as the strongest deck ever. It was a tier 0 format, basically meaning if you weren't playing Teledad, you had no chance to compete at any sort of competitive level. The deck cost minimum $1,000, if not more than that. Some players saw that you needed to have the prize card, Crush Card Virus, to include into the deck if you wanted to take it to another level, and that would cost you even more money, several $1,000s. It was just absurd. It was a very bad time because I think a lot of people got dissuaded, myself included. I actually took a break from the game and went on hiatus because I couldn't stand the fact that that was the only way you could really play the game competitively to have any sort of chance. So it was not a good time for Yu-Gi-Oh! If you couldn't afford the best deck, and the idea of pay to win, that's kind of where it originated.
When Synchros were first released, I thought that it was a really good step in the right direction, because up until that point, especially when it came to competitive Yu-Gi-Oh, there were only a few decks over like Yu-Gi-Oh's competitive history that even used the extra deck. In fact, during the GX era, it was quite common to see decks in the top cut not even use an extra deck. So I felt like Synchro was a very practical way to get people to start using the extra deck, and it was incredibly just intuitive and easy to learn.
Yu-Gi-Oh! Zaxel was then created following Yuma and aired between 2011 and 2012 on Nicktoons. The series introduced Xyz monsters, where the players would combine two monsters with the same level to summon the Xyz monster. The player base is divided on certain aspects of the game concerning balance, but most agree that this is where the game began to be much faster than it should have been, and forever changed the state of the game.
When it comes to Xyz, I believe is the best mechanic that they've ever given us, and it's simply because of how easy it is to learn and how simple it is and how practical it is. You can use decks from Yu-Gi-Oh's first era. I'm talking about decks from like 2003, 2004, and those decks can actually exceed because it's very easy to understand, you know, level 4 monster plus level 4 monster equals a new Xyz monster. So I definitely love the Xyz mechanic.
I wasn't around when Xyz monsters were first released, but I came back into the game not too long after, and I think Xyz monsters were a really cool concept. It was kind of just another summoning mechanic compared to synchro summoning, but the idea that you have this monster that has basically effects that relied on the number of materials you use to make that monster, it was kind of cool. It was something pretty neat, and honestly, it's one of my favorite summoning mechanics even to this day.
Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5 aired between 2014 and 2017, following YuGiOh, and introduced Pendulum cards, the combination of both monster cards and spell cards. Double the opportunities, while also being doubly vulnerable to destruction. This, for the first time, changed the game board, while adding pendulum zones so that players could set the scale and summon any monster whose levels were anywhere between the number on the scales. This also caused upset within the player base. Though an interesting mechanic, it further increased the speed of the game, and the radical changes to the game was difficult for the players to adapt.
Pendulum summoning is absurd. Honestly, I don't think pendulum summoning should have ever existed in this game. If some people say, you know, about every summoning mechanic that, oh, this mechanic breaks the game. No, pendulum summoning broke the game. The idea that you can literally summon 5 monsters at once for no cost is completely and utterly broken. And you have to remember, this is back during Master Rule 3, where Link monsters did not exist, so you could freely summon 5 monsters every single turn, assuming you had 2 monsters in the pendulum scale that could accommodate those levels. It's literally free card advantage, and it was to the point where if you weren't playing a pendulum deck, you were just completely outclassed by some of the other decks that were available at the time. And this also led to one of the strongest decks, if not maybe arguably the strongest deck ever released in this game's history, which was Pepe. And oh my god, if you just see videos of that deck being played in the OCG, because luckily they banned it in the TCG after a single event so that we didn't have to play that deck at full power. Wow, we really dodged a bullet with that one.
When it comes to Pendulum, I didn't like that mechanic at all. It's too complicated, it's too convoluted. The monsters don't go to the graveyard, they go to the extra deck. There's all these different rulings. They're half spell and they're half monster. Sometimes their monster effects will activate if they're destroyed as spells. Way too difficult. Also, the power ceiling on the Pendulum Summon was way too high. A lot of Yu-Gi-Oh's mechanics, you kind of put 2 monsters in and you get a new monster out. Pendulum was completely different. It was like put 2 cards on the field as scales and get to summon like 15 monsters. It just wasn't very good and healthy for the game, in my opinion.
But in 2017, Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains would further change the game with the introduction of Link monsters. The largest issue players have with the game is that special summoning monsters has been abused and needs to be refined. Link monsters were made to dictate where a player could special summon a monster if the monster were in their extra deck. The arrows unlock areas on the board, and those areas is where a special summon is allowed. Plenty of debate argues whether or not Link monsters slowed the game to where it should be. Most agree it didn't change as much as it needed to.
Link summoning is cool. It's definitely one that took a little while to get used to because the monsters don't have defense, they can't go face down. The Link pointers make things a little more complicated, but at the same time it makes things a lot more strategic. Overall, I like it because of how easy it is to use. It kind of feels like synchro summoning just with blue monsters. When it comes to the mechanics and how they've actually affected the game, the last 2 mechanics have had much bigger impacts than the previous ones. The previous ones were just kind of adding like, you know, a little bit of spice, but the last ones have been like complete overhauls on the game.
At first, first, I wasn't really a fan of Link monsters because they fundamentally changed how we played the game, because no longer could you summon monsters freely from your extra deck. You had to now summon a Link monster if you wanted to summon more monsters from your extra deck, because the monsters had to be summoned to zones that the Link monsters point towards. And I think that just made it more difficult for newer and returning players to understand how to get back into the game, because you just fundamentally changed like how we've played the game for the last 10 to 15 years, and I think it left a sour taste in a lot of the player base's mouth. However, now that we've had Link summoning for over a year at the time of recording this, I actually kind of like it. We can do some things now that we weren't able to previously, and some of the effects that these Link monsters have is really cool and actually adds a nice dynamic to the game. But then we also have degenerate things like the extra Link, which completely prevent our opponent from playing the game and is essentially a win condition in itself, and that's something I really don't like about Link summoning. But I think overall, even though you kind of have to go through some extra steps to do things that your deck was pretty much already able to before previously, I think it's a nice change, and I think a lot of players have really gotten used to it.
Yu-Gi-Oh! Created an entire genre of anime known simply as card game anime, and is considered wholly unique compared to other shonen anime. It's been used as a template for successors and laid the foundation for card games ever since. The original manga, centering around the adventures of Yugi and his friends, lasted 343 chapters, or 38 volumes, ending in 2004. Afterward, Kazuki Takahashi took a step back from Yu-Gi-Oh! The manga continued with every iteration of the show and was supervised by Kazuki Takahashi, but written and illustrated by others, each series having their own unique combination of creators. Kazuki Takahashi created Studio Dice, and is credited in every Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga, using either his name or his studio. The manga strayed very far away from the animated series after the original series. The creation process flipped after the original series ended. It used to be that Kazuki Takahashi would create the manga, and the series would be based on that story. Now, the animation and manga are produced separately, using the same characters but having completely different stories. One of the most highly praised manga was Yu-Gi-Oh! GX. The manga is now produced after the animated series, often being very far behind the television series, but this doesn't seem to bother the fans. It began simply as Yu-Gi-Oh! Until he went on to make Yu-Gi-Oh! Duelist, which focused on the Duel Monsters card game. Yu-Gi-Oh! Millennium World, which focuses on the Pharaoh, the spirit living within the Millennium Puzzle, going back to Egypt and fulfilling his destiny to find his memories. Yu-Gi-Oh! R, released as a side story that takes place after the Battle City arc, where Maximilian Pegasus' son vows revenge against Yugi. Afterwards, every manga was made to follow the current anime series. Eventually, Viz Media would publish the 3-in-1 series, which compiled 3 volumes of the original manga and fixed the censoring issues and editing mistakes of the original series. The 3-in-1 series includes every volume from Yu-Gi-Oh! To Yu-Gi-Oh! Millennium World.
I like the manga because when we got the 4Kids version of the anime, you know, that's what a lot of people grew up with, we didn't really get the true Yu-Gi-Oh! Story. Yu-Gi-Oh! In the manga is very, very dark, and there is some sadistic shit that goes on in the manga, and I really think that's kind of really fascinating, especially as we got older and learned that that's kind of how the origins of the story initially were meant to play out. But then we got this 4Kids version in the anime that's like the censored version of it. So I really like the manga because it kind of gave us a glimpse into what Yu-Gi-Oh! Was really supposed to be like. It had a very dark undertone. There was death, there was blood, like it was awesome, but yet we didn't know about this until like several years later, until you actually discovered that that's how it was supposed to be.
This summer, monsters you've never seen before will be brought to life, more powerful than ever. And the battle for the fate of the future will be here. Yu-Gi-Oh! The movie.
This is more than just a duel!
Yugi must face the mysteries of his past.
During the late 1900s to the early 2000s, animated movies of popular children's cartoons were common, and Yu-Gi-Oh! Was no exception. A total of 4 Yu-Gi-Oh! Movies has been created. The first debuted in 1999 based on the original manga, and was only released in Japanese. The movie most Yu-Gi-Oh! Fans remember is The Pyramid of Light, released in 2004, made to have taken place after the Battle City arc, but fans often argue whether or not it's considered canon. This was a special occasion for Yu-Gi-Oh! Fans since they gave limited edition booster packs to those who bought a ticket while supplies lasted. 6 years later, Bonds Beyond Time released, and was made to tie together the 3 series that had released at the time. In 2016, the fans of Yu-Gi-Oh! Were shocked and excited to hear that another animated movie would be made and would take place after the end of the original series and was written by Kazuki Takahashi. Yu-Gi-Oh! Dark Side of Dimensions released in 2016, and again, they gave away limited edition trading cards, and a bit of attention was brought back to the Yu-Gi-Oh! Franchise. I remember my father took me to go see The Pyramid of Light. To be honest, I mostly wanted to go get the exclusive cards. I loved the experience, even if the movie wasn't that good. And when I heard they were making another movie in 2017 for the United States, I could barely believe what I'd been told. Of course, my dad and I went again, and since we both bought a ticket, we both received exclusive Obelisk the Tormentor cards, which he then immediately handed to me because he knew he had no use for it. The movie had the same cheesy moments from the 4Kids television adaptation, along with expanding the original story and creating really tense moments in the duels. It's probably the most faithful Yu-Gi-Oh! Movie I've ever seen. A reprint of the original volumes of Yu-Gi-Oh! Were released featuring all new artwork from Kazuki Takahashi in celebration of the new film. Called Bunkoban manga, it gave Takahashi a chance to show how his art style improved. These manga covered the most popular arcs of the original series, with every page being fully colored. This has never released outside of Japan. Yu-Gi-Oh! Has managed to evolve, and after so many years, they began appealing to the nostalgic players and paying homage to the original series. 2 art books were created. Dual Art, featuring the illustrations of Kazuki Takahashi, was released in 2015. And The Art of the Cards was released in 2017, featuring the artwork of some of the most iconic cards, along with alternate illustrations. The title was a play on words of the popular catchphrase, "Believe in the heart of the cards." A special production was made for the 20th anniversary. The OCG 20th anniversary set reprinted the original Volume 1 booster packs, along with other special products. In an attempt to reinvigorate the player base of Yu-Gi-Oh!, a mobile app was released known as Duel Links. It was advertised in the screenings of the Dark Side of Dimension film and became a massive success. Though the gameplay is watered down and is a simplified version of the physical card game, it managed to spark the interest of fans who had forgotten the series. Eventually, it became so widely loved by the community, its own metagame had to be considered, and players began to play Duel Links competitively as well.
It's over! Go, Dark Magician! Dark Magic Attack!
That's why you're the one and only king of games. Thanks for the duel, Yug.
It's not whether you win or lose, it's how you play the game. And for that, this was a great duel.
Currently, Yu-Gi-Oh! Lives on, but its creator doesn't have a strong influence in its creation. Not much is known about the personal life of Kazuki Takahashi, and very few interviews exist. It's not uncommon for illustrators in Japan to live very isolated lives, most seldom ever show their face. After Kazuki Takahashi decided to write the story to the Dark Side of Dimensions, and deemed it as the true final of the original series, he hasn't worked on any major projects. Though he is still active on social media and still improves his style of illustration, not much else is seen or heard from him. So, where is Yu-Gi-Oh! Today? In terms of the business, Konami's stocks have seen a good amount of growth in recent years. Tournaments are held every year, and there doesn't seem to be any sign of it stopping. A consistent and steady stream of anime and product is released yearly. Over 25 million trading cards have been sold, and Konami is seen as the most successful trading card company thanks to their established player base in multiple countries. Yu-Gi-Oh! Has changed, but it doesn't seem to have slowed down. Consistently changing with new mechanics, characters, and stories, the franchise seems to have a long future ahead of it. One thing is for certain. Yu-Gi-Oh! Gave kids power. Maybe a child can't win against an adult in a fight, but with a game, they'll always have a chance. The cards give hope to people, and the community that's flourished is a dedicated group of individuals that truly love this game.